Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another review. Full disclosure, the drinking game that we normally do is on an indefinite hiatus throughout this video because I want to live long enough to see Christmas. But as you can tell from the title of this video, today we're going to be looking at the Aquaman by Geoff Johns Omnibus. The artist at the beginning was Ivan Reis, and then later on, Paul Pelletier took over for the second half. And this first debuted in 2011 after the Flashpoint series and continued for the first 25 issues. During that time, you had crossover issues with the Justice League, there was a Zero issue, and there was also some sort of mini tie-ins to the Forever Evil story arc. And the New 52 was a time for new readers, new stories and new opportunities. And this was one of the first books that was announced for you before we even knew that this was going to be a company-wide relaunch. And before this, Aquaman wasn't a character that many people would buy. And beyond that, he was known in the popular culture thanks to stuff like The Big Bang Theory and Robot Chicken as kind of the joke of the Justice League. So this had a really difficult task of finding a way of reinvigorating this character and making him command some kind of respect within the wider DC universe and the comics industry as a whole. So we're going to take a look at it today, and we're also going to ask the question of if this is a great reintroduction for this character for both new readers and old. If you've seen any of my reviews before, you know we're going to look at the plot, the art, we're going to do a spoiler-free section, and then we're going to talk some spoilers all before the final verdict. But before I can do any of that, we need to get into my too long didn't watch. This is my too long didn't watch. It's the part of the video where if you can't be bothered to watch the full thing, I'm just going to give you a snippet of it to see if it's something that might be for you. And this Aquaman Omnibus is one of the most fun reads that I've had in a good long while, and it's from one of the best creative teams. And although it doesn't always stick the landing, there's enough here to keep you entertained, especially for a character that a lot of people might not have considered and is often misunderstood. So if that's all the review that you needed, thank you for tuning in. Make sure that you click that thumbs up button, and if you haven't done so already, click the subscribe button down below and click the bell notification so that you never miss a video. But if you're here for the full review, let's take a look at the plot. Arthur Curry is back. Having been annoyed at the way that the people of Earth have treated the seas in his time as ruler of Atlantis, Aquaman makes a decision to relinquish his royal position so that he can become a full-time superhero again. This leads him to Amnesty Bay with his girlfriend, and definitely not his wife because we can't allow that to happen, but it's Mira. Once here, Aquaman tries to do whatever he can to improve his reputation because there's this stigma about him that he's a lesser superhero than the other members of the Justice League. And no matter what he does or who he tries to save, there's always somebody that's got some stupid joke about him talking to fish. But then the trench opens. Emerging from the sea comes an army of monsters, and this is the first arc that carries us through this series. From there we see Aquaman embark on a mission with the others, which is a team of mysterious heroes who all have some kind of Atlantean relic, and one by one they are being targeted by a mysterious force. We see the oceans wage war on Earth and the Justice League crossover Throne of Atlantis. This all builds up to the finale, Death of the King, where all of the questions that Arthur's been asking of himself throughout this series come to a head. So is he really fit to be King of Atlantis? What happens when his loyalties between the land and the sea are tested? And can Aquaman do enough to become the respected hero that he wants to be? Now we're going to take a look at the art, and it's a bit unfair when we're discussing it in this book. We start off with Ivan Reis, who's one of the best in the industry, and it's kind of the perfect choice when it comes to this title. Regardless of if you see Aquaman as B-list, C-list or even D-list, you've got two A-list creators that are on this. There's no aspect of comic art that you can point to and say that Ivan Reis does badly. His action has a sense of pace, and it's clear what's happening even when there's a lot of stuff that is going on. And when he does scenery and you're looking into the background, there's always a lot of detail put into those panels. If I had to find one nitpick, it'd be the fact that he can't really seem to draw an open mouth that well, and because of that I think he's maybe aware of it, so every character is always really tight-lipped. So people will for the most part always be talking with a closed mouth, and it's just one of those things that sort of throws you off a bit, but considering it's Ivan Reis you forgive him because the rest of it's also great. Some of the best examples of the art was when it was underwater because it'd just be submerged in complete darkness. So the characters would just be engulfed in this black liquid and you couldn't really see much further past it. Because of the fact that in previous panels he's been detailed with what you can see behind the characters, this kind of drove up that fear of the unknown that you often get when you're looking at deep sea diving. Because I heard this fact, and I'm never really sure where anybody gets any of these kind of facts from, but we know more about space than we do about the ocean, so there's depths of it that we don't understand. And this held up that sense of mystery, and considering that you knew that the trench creatures were lurking within this sea, it kind of made you feel a bit on edge and you didn't know if they were already surrounding Aquaman. Where the art really peaked was during the Justice League crossover, because at this point Ivan Reis was also drawing the JL title. You had entire cities submerged featured in water, you had creatures that were attacking on land, and you had pretty much the majority of the DC heroes. It almost made me wish that there was some kind of absolute edition just for Throne of Atlantis, because I felt like there was so much detail in here that I didn't really get to experience the full extent of. As well, that might be due to the fact that I was reading it quite quickly, but at the same time, I'd like a little bit more time and in a bigger format. It's after Throne of Atlantis that the art changes over to Paul Pelletier, and I kind of feel sorry for this dude. If he'd been the artist from issue 1, I'd still be here saying that I enjoyed the run and that the art was great, but when you're following someone like Ivan Reis, you notice all of the differences. It's not like it derails the story or that it was even a massive change, it's just the fact that he doesn't seem to have that same level of detail or polish that Ivan Reis had. But his landscape work, and particularly when you're looking at like the Atlantean mythology stuff, was really well done. And all throughout his drawings of the book, it was still really enjoyable, it's just that it seemed to lack the vibrancy, which I found a bit weird because of the fact that it was the same colourist for both artists. I'm hoping it doesn't sound like I'm trashing his work, because it was still really good, and I think when you're coming in as a replacement so late into a Geoff Johns run, it is a difficult task to accomplish, but he still found a way to do that. As well, it does feel like he has a very similar style to what Ivan Reis had, so it's not too much of a departure, but at the same time, I think that's the best thing that they could have done, because if they'd gone in like a completely opposite direction, like if they would have done something that had looked completely flat, or maybe if they'd gone with like a John Romita Jr. or something like that, it would have probably damaged the feel of the book that he'd been building from issue 1. Like, I'd be interested in reading a book that Pelletier illustrates from issue 1 so that he can get a fair chance and so that I can really judge his art fairly, rather than just comparing him to the guy that came before. But all in all, this is a beautiful looking book from start to finish, and I can't really see anybody disliking this style. Now we're going to be getting into the spoiler-free section of this video, and Johns did it again, didn't he? It's funny because people who don't read comics but know about comics culture, maybe they've watched a few films and stuff like that, still have that same belief that Aquaman is the joke of the team. But in the comics community, you don't really hear that joke going around anymore, and it's because of this run. I can't even remember what happened to Aquaman in Brightest Day, but to now have this character have his own ongoing solo series, and for it to be one of the best runs within the New 52, is something that we didn't think was possible before. Even when the announcement came that it was Geoff Johns who was taking over this title, we thought that if there was anybody that could make this character successful, it'd be him, but we still thought that maybe this was finally him biting off more than he could chew. I've read the trench part of this story when it was coming out in single issues, but it does still hold up now. They made a great decision by making this just smaller in scale and telling a personal story with Aquaman rather than doing a rebirth like they'd done with the Flash or Green Lantern. This meant they gave Aquaman a chance to establish who that character is and also give you a feel of what he's about. And sure, the trench characters aren't the most exciting villains and you don't really learn anything about them personally, but they had that B-list movie kind of 50s horror film vibe about them, which makes sense because of the fact that Aquaman wasn't an A-list character at this point. We then move on to the Other League, which was still enjoyable, but it's probably my least favourite part of this book. It just felt like they introduced way too many characters at once, especially ones that I'm not really sure if I've ever seen them before, and I didn't really get any time with them to see exactly who it was that I liked. There was one, and it's this agent looking dude here, I can't remember his name, but it just felt like they pulled all the focus away from Aquaman, especially when they'd spent so much time and effort making sure that you wanted to see this character in a comic. I already know that I'm probably in the minority with this because of the fact that they got a spin-off series, Aquaman and the Others, but I've got no real intention to read that, it just doesn't really appeal to me. And again, I'm not saying that this is bad, I still read through it really quickly, it's just if you were to put a gun to my head and said which is the worst part of the Aquaman run, it's going to be this one. But the book then immediately redeems itself with the Throne of Atlantis crossover. This just worked issue after issue, and it managed to avoid the problem that most event comics have. I haven't read much of the New 52 since it was coming out in single issues, but I jumped into this and it wasn't like I felt like I'd missed out on so much story. Besides the fact that Superman and Wonder Woman are going out in this continuity, that was pretty much the only thing that I really needed to remind myself of. Which is weird because the sentiments don't apply when it comes to the Forever Evil part of this book. I was completely lost, like there was a 2-page recap that told you what was kind of going on, but I felt like I needed to actually read those issues to know what was happening in the 2 Forever Evil crossovers that happened here. But for Throne of Atlantis, there were so many great moments in this arc, and it was the highlight of this book. It also somehow managed to never take the spotlight away from Arthur, which would have been easy to do when you've got so many overpowering characters, and the fact that they managed to do it in the arc that came just before this one. Orm was also really great as a bad guy, and it felt like he was never powerful enough to do this kind of thing on his own, which is why he needed an army, but that made it feel a bit more sinister because of the fact that it felt like he didn't really have control over the plan that he was enforcing. It's just a shame that the final arc, Death of a King, didn't really have the same vibe when it came to the villain. Atlan was good enough, especially when I look at his character design, which I thought was really good, but he didn't have as much of a presence as Orm did, and there was parts where Orm showed up and he kind of took the attention away from the main bad guy that you were supposed to be following. Like, yeah, Atlan was powerful, but during those last couple of issues, I was more interested in the questions that Arthur was being asked of himself, rather than this big bad guy that is the final arc of this storyline from Geoff Johns. This was supposed to be the climax of the story, and I just felt like it missed the landing a little bit, and it didn't really feel as impactful as it probably could have been. In terms of characters, I really love what they did with Arthur. They somehow managed to lean into the jokes about Aquaman, but it was never at his expense. He also went on a great journey from being this character that had given up the throne so that he could get some more reputation on land, to then realising that maybe he hadn't been that good of a leader all along, or maybe he shouldn't have been leader to begin with, to then eventually realising that that is something that is his destiny, and he's slowly trying to figure out the way that he can step into that. And if I'm being honest, Mira was probably my favourite character in this, and not just because of the way that she's drawn. I'm not that much of a perv anymore. I just like that she was really integral to this story, but it never became solely focused on her because of the fact that they remembered that the main focus should always be Aquaman. Like, some of my favourite moments from this book was when it was those two characters just interacting with people throughout Amnesty Bay, whether that was for the better or for the worse. And when I do reviews, I get people saying that I don't respect the complexity of certain stories, or that I don't get the author's intention, or maybe I don't understand all the nuances of the book, but the average reader isn't going to be too bothered about that. They just want to be entertained. Is this Watchmen? No. Is this Joker, the uber deep meta narrative that you have to be such an intellectual to understand or even comprehend? No. But this is just damn good fun, and sometimes we need those runs, or we need those books that just remind us that this is what comics are supposed to be. They're supposed to be entertaining, they're supposed to take you on a journey, it's supposed to be some kind of roller coaster experience. And for me, Aquaman by Geoff Johns did exactly that. Now we're going to be getting into the spoiler section, so if you don't want anything about this book spoiled, I'm going to leave a timestamp down below so that you can skip to the final verdict. This is the first time that I've reviewed a book that is a run, but it's got mini arcs throughout it, so it's going to be the case that maybe my scripting's a little bit rusty, because I feel like the majority of my thoughts from the spoiler-free section are just really going to be expanded on a bit here. The biggest twist in this was Vulko's involvement in the Throne of Atlantis tsunami. I didn't trust this guy from the minute that he was introduced, and it was weird because his betrayal was still surprising, but it was never against what the character believed in or what they were working towards. It was just that he went too far in his aim to see Arthur return to the throne, and weirdly, he got exactly what he wanted, and that was the reason why he ended up getting punished. I like that kind of dramatic irony, because you know, if Orm would still be in charge of Atlantis, he wouldn't have bothered like making Vulko a criminal. And I felt like that was a really good development. It also made Arthur question what kind of leader he would be, or whether this is something that he feels he's got any right to invoke. Although the one sort of mini storyline that I really didn't care for was the one about Mira's former husband, or whatever it was. And if I'm wrong, I know that somebody will feel the unavoidable desire to correct me in the comment section below. All I'm saying is that I cared so little about this storyline that I couldn't even be bothered to check on Wikipedia if I was correct. I'm just saying that to prove how little of an impact this had over the overall story of the book, or my enjoyment on it. But the real great moments in this was Aquaman's interaction with the Justice League. And yeah, it is a bit of a shame because the Justice League is probably always going to be more exciting than an individual Aquaman story, but there was moments like Aquaman punching Superman in the face, and when he stood against the entire Justice League. Considering that the aim of this was to make sure that Aquaman didn't come across as a joke, those two things alone solidified that he is this character that you really don't want to mess with. And although I did love this book, I feel like reading Geoff Johns' run of Green Lantern kind of made me feel a bit shortchanged when it came to Aquaman. I'm not sure if Geoff Johns was on this for as long as he wanted to be, because Green Lantern was obviously about 10 years of storytelling, whereas Aquaman was about 2. Because of that, when I was getting to the end, it did feel like it was a bit rushed, because we went straight from this crossover, which was this earth-spanning event, into the final act, and we didn't really get any time with the characters to see them develop or breathe as soon as it was that we hit Throne of Atlantis. From there, we were pretty much on a collision course until the end, and I'm wondering if, for whatever reason, Geoff Johns' time on this book was cut short. But as I was writing my notes for this video, I thought back and I was like, when you think about Green Lantern, people only really talk about Sinestro Corps War or Blackest Night. They never really talk about War of the Lanterns or wherever it was that ended this book. So maybe it's a similar thing, like, yeah, the ending in Green Lantern is much better and it feels like it's panned out and it feels like they actually got to explore and go in the direction that they wanted, whereas this feels as if he went, oh, I've only got 6 more issues left, I best just rush me ending. And I do appreciate that obviously they would have had to leave it in a position for the person who was going to continue writing it after Geoff Johns left, but it didn't really feel like you got that time to earn the victory at the end. You didn't really feel like you'd left this character in a place where you're happy to leave see them. And I know this is going to sound completely contradictory, but I still did like the end bit in Amnesty Bay, where it was clear that them two were comfortable there now and they'd found the place, and they'd also got Aquadog. But I just mean when I look at that entire arc as a whole and where it fit in within the story, it did feel a bit out of place, and I'm wondering if maybe Johns originally had a different plan. One thing that did drag the story down a little bit was when there was those universe spanning events that Aquaman just had to be involved in. The 0 year stuff was pretty good, but I don't really feel like it added too much to the story for me, and it probably could have just been a few lines of exposition. But it was the Forever Evil stuff that really threw me for a bit of a loop. I don't think I've read any of that event, and if I have, I don't remember much of it. And in this book you pretty much just see the beginning of it and the end, and the middle's just sort of summarised in 2 pages, and it feels really unsatisfying. Like, I'm contemplating, should they have just left those issues out of the book in case of some kind of eventual Forever Evil omnibus? Because it doesn't really feel like it fit in place here, and obviously you've got Black Manta that's part of the story, so yeah, it is still technically an Aquaman story, but for me it just didn't really do that much that I felt like it added anything to this story, and you can tell that it was clearly just to adhere to the Forever Evil arc that was going throughout DC Comics at the time. Because if you're doing an event comic tie-in, it should always still build on from the story that you're telling, rather than taking away from it so that you can tell someone else's story. So a good example of this for me is Captain America by Ed Brubaker, because you've got stuff like Civil War that was happening at the time, but they found a way to tell their story within the Civil War universe. So when I think about those 2 issues, I feel like it's wasted potential, considering the fact that I felt like the overall ending of the book was a little bit rushed. Yeah, they did have to leave the door open, and it felt like Arthur still went on some kind of journey into learning who he would be as the leader of Atlantis. But ironically, similar to what I said about the Forever Evil issues, when I think about the book as a whole, it feels like we missed out part of the middle. Now we're getting into my final verdict, and when I think about comics and the characters and the main 2 companies in particular, Marvel and DC, there isn't many runs that you can look at and say that that is pretty much going to turn anyone into a fan of that character. Weirdly, the only other ones that I can think of were also written by Geoff Johns, like Green Lantern. But I would add this Aquaman book into this list because I can't really see there being much in here that somebody wouldn't like. I already know that this isn't going to be one of my favourite runs of all time, but I look at this book and I can't think of anybody that would have a strong dislike towards it. The characters are fun, the art is some of the best in the New 52, and the stories are pretty enjoyable whether you know something about Aquaman or not. Considering that most people thought it had the impossible task of rejuvenating a character that had broken through the comics industry into the mainstream as being a bit of a joke, it's crazy to see how well it accomplished that. Sure, once I finished the book it did feel like it was cut short, and I'm used to seeing the Geoff Johns name stretched across a couple of whammy omnibuses rather than this thin one here. What we get from this book is still enjoyable, and it's a great example of what makes comics fun. Like, to let you in on a little bit of a secret, due to the schedule of this channel, I ended up reading this about 2 or so weeks ago before I got a chance to sit down and write out my thoughts. But it was still really easy to think back on this story, and I didn't need to read it again to understand what had happened, and I just remembered having a lot of fun with it. And yes, it doesn't feel like all the 4 arcs within this book were created equal, and there's some instances where the wider DC universe affects the quality of the storytelling in here. I thoroughly enjoyed it, page to page. It's another great Geoff Johns run, it's another seminal part of the New 52, and I'd recommend it to near enough anybody that likes comics. So Aquaman by Geoff Johns is going to get 4 out of 5 woofs. Woof 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 woof. So that's my review, and I'm hoping you've enjoyed it. If you've read Aquaman before, what are some of your thoughts, and let me know in the comments section below. Because of the scheduling of this channel, I've already read the next book that I'm going to review, and I'm going to tell you here first, if you've watched to the end of this video, it is going to be The Umbrella Academy Volume 1. And that's going to be one worth looking forward to, so if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't enjoy this video, why did you get this far? If you haven't done so already, please click that subscribe button, and if you want to know as soon as videos come out, because I've got like the most erratic schedule that's going, please click that bell notification so that you never miss a video. I'd recommend checking out some of my social media links, because the reason that I'm reading this is because I did a poll on my channel, and this was the one that won over 4 other books. So I'm always doing stuff like that and getting your involvement on what should be on this channel, but just make sure that you're following the links up above so that you can take part. And if you want to support the channel, it is greatly appreciated. All that I will ask is that you treat yourself to a book. Maybe you want to pick up this Aquaman Omnibus here, but just please make sure you use one of the Amazon affiliate links down below. I can't see any of your details, it doesn't increase the price, it just means that eventually some of the money is going to help contribute towards me buying a new camera. But that's another video done, and if you made it to this point, thank you for watching. I've got nothing else to say except for to stay safe, stay reading the best books that you can find, and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof, see you at the next video.